A big hello to our viewers out there. Welcome to the first of our four-part series, Admission Essentials by Sesameed Education. In this series, we'll be sharing with you what you need to know about American boarding school admission. I'm your host, Daniel Cito. I'm an education consultant and founder and head of Sesameed Education. Did you know that in order to get into American boarding schools, you will need more than good academics? And have you ever wondered what do American boarding schools look for in the candidates? Today, we're very honored to have with us Mr. Leo Marshall, the former Director of Admission and Financial Aid at the Webb Schools in the United States, as our special guest for this series. Welcome, Leo.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to see you again. My old friend from Hong Kong, originally.
Yes, indeed. And Leo, in terms of our topic for today, I would like to first start off with learning from you about what the factors are that American boarding schools consider in creating its incoming class or forming its incoming class, and what are the reasons behind, and what is the spirit behind American boarding education from your years operating in the field?
Well, there's a couple questions there in one. Let's start with the why of boarding education. American boarding education goes way back. It follows the British system 100 years ago. And really, boarding education was seen as a place for students to learn independence, self-reliance, a sense of academic rigor, a sense of learning to take some risks, intellectual risks, to try new things. In an environment where there's teachers, their faculty, staff are with them pretty much 24 hours a day, which is very different than day schools in any country. So it's a real power to boarding education. But because of the nature of boarding education, yes, they are looking for a specific type of student, which is makes it a little different than day schools. Not that day schools aren't looking for strong students also. It's just that boarding education is one more layer above that we're looking for when considering a student in a boarding school. I was in boarding education for a very long time. I was in private independent schools in America. Some call them private schools, but independent schools in America, I was for 40 years. And so I was mostly in admission for about 27 of those years. I was also a president of a school. So it gave me a broader perspective when I arrived at Webb on what type of students you're looking for. And I want to emphasize to your audience that there's no formula. I've traveled all through Asia, Southeast Asia, China, Middle East, Europe, and there's always this tendency to think, just give us the formula for getting into a school like yours. And Webb was a fairly selective school, but that's not true. There's no formula. But you asked, when building the class. So if I'm starting a new school year, we're about to build, and usually the entry level would be, we call it, grade 9. First of all, we're looking for academically strong students. That's important because they have to be ready for a fairly rigorous academic program. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean you have to have all perfect scores. That's a kind of a myth. We'll talk about myths later. But you have to have demonstrated that you're a strong student because it's going to be a little bit different. You're not going to be able to go home and spend time, with your parents, helping with homework or studies. You're going to be in your own environment where you're going to have to a little bit learn on your own at nighttime when you're preparing for the next day's classes. But then we have to look at when we're building the class, boys, girls, we have programs that need to be developed. We have orchestras, we have choral programs, we have sports, and all those need to be filled. That doesn't mean that we would take an excellent athlete who's not very strong academically over more academically strong students, but it does mean we're looking to fill those spaces. So we're looking for certain talents that help the school out. And then there's this sort of it's really hard to pin down what it means, but a certain personality to fill our school. These are students that are going to live together 24 hours a day in dormitories, different cultures, different experiences, different languages, and they have to learn to get along. They have to learn to appreciate each other. They have to learn to respect each other. So that goes all into the selection process when we're building that class. And every year is a little bit different. Every year we have kind of different priorities, but number one priority is academic readiness. So that's an important word, readiness, academic readiness, not academic excellence. Readiness is a little different term than excellence. We assume you're a good student, but readiness means you're ready to step into another academic challenge that's going to be very different than your previous school.
And in terms of individual assessment, from your experience, I mean, how do American boarding schools value academics on one side, which are more or less more quantitative, versus the less quantitative or more qualitative aspects, such as activities, social, and personal character traits? So how do American boarding schools balance both in the individual assessments?
It's kind of a tightrope when you're going through there. But first of all, academic readiness, that's important. How do we assess that? Well, we are going to look at previous schools' academic record from a previous school. Many schools are no longer requiring the famous aptitude test, the SSAT, the Independent School Entrance Exam, or if you're in the British system, those preparation exams. So some schools still are using those, but more and more schools are not using those. So that's making it, those were helpful. But after a while, all the test scores, because we're all seeing excellent students, all look the same. Because what's important to understand is when you're applying to a fairly selective school, nobody's applying who's not a good student. This is really important to understand. We don't get poor students applying. It's a selecting process. So we don't have students with bad grades applying because they will not get accepted. So we're dealing with students with all excellent grades, excellent teacher references, and in some cases, if some are still requiring the aptitude test, again, the SSAT, ISEE, that they were more and more were starting to look the same. And so, boy, now we get to the tough part, because then that goes back to your first question, how to build a class. And that's where it all comes together. And that's why I said, and I will say this over and over again, there's no formula for this. Now, to your second point, then we do look at, what students did outside of the classroom in their previous year. Now, we understand that many of the middle schools, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, don't have a lot of the extracurricular school activities. Some do, some don't in the United States. But what interest does a student have, and how far did they take those interests? We're not looking for someone to show us every single activity they could think of and tried, and we would get that quite often, by the way. But none of that was done well. It wasn't done with purpose. It wasn't something that they stayed with. So it's wonderful that they participate in activities, but at what level were they in the activities? Level of interest, not necessarily were they a successful debater or a successful violinist, but what did they put into that? What was their sense of determination to do better in that, or their love for their activity? That's what we try to have to assess when we're looking at that. So let's say a student says they were a violinist. I would say, how many years have you played? Were you first chair, second chair? It didn't matter to me sometimes, but how long were you in orchestra? What is your love for music? Tell me a little bit more about that. Have you any other experiences? And that's what we're looking for. We're not interested necessarily whether they had the Royal Academy level number of 3 or 4 or 5. That really, to be honest with you, doesn't tell us a lot. That just says that's a pretty rote program, not to pick on that. But that doesn't tell us much. But we see someone who has performed at a high level or within an orchestra and stayed with it, more than 1 or 2 years, then that catches our interest. And then, by the way, in that particular case, we would also ask the student to send us a DVD or a CD or a music recording of their music to see, where they're level at. And then we give it to the music director. But the important thing here is, what was your interest? What was your passion? How did you follow that passion? What did you do with that? It's really important. We're not interested necessarily in, you're just doing one thing after another to try to build a resume. That doesn't really work for us at all. So it's kind of a long answer to the question. There's 2 parts: trying to figure out the academic, then trying to figure out, what they're doing in outside the classroom, and at what level did they take it? What the real interest did they do with that?
Leo, may I kind of digress a little to
Sure.
try to learn from you? What is really the American philosophy behind well-roundedness? Because, we help families, apply to boarding schools everywhere in the world, including America, but also beyond America. And not every country or not every culture would place equal level of significance or focus on well-roundedness. Can you explain a little bit about why American boarding schools place so much emphasis on well-roundedness?
There's more to learning than just the classroom. The learning process is learning to connect with others, to be with others. That personal piece. It's not just academics. It's also developing the whole person. Not only the intellectual skills, but the emotional intelligence. There's a big piece. Emotional intelligence. How do you get along? How do you accept? Yes. How do you respond to failure? Sometimes conflict, interpersonal conflict. How do you deal with that? So that's where the American thinking, and I can't speak for other countries, but this piece about emotional intelligence is so important. And in speaking about boarding schools, we always like to say that the day you walk across that graduation stage, what kind of person are you? She contributed to the community by her gift of person. She contributed to us in the classroom by taking intellectual risks, asking questions. We're looking for people who want to engage with each other. And at the same time, here's the most important part. Have fun. They're still teenagers. Right. We don't want this to be, as they say in America, a grind where that's all I'm doing is studying and working. And it is hard at times. There's no question about it. But they're still teenagers. And it's important for us as schools, because it goes both ways. We want them to be teenagers. We don't want them to be adults before it's their adult years. This is the last chance they'll get to be a teenager. Because when they do go to college, it is about studying. It's not about when they go to university, they're not going to be asking about, how you handle interpersonal relationships. And, they're not going to be caring about that, what you did in the violin. So these are the years. These are the most important years that they have. And parents have to understand that we're not there to get them into whatever the celebrity university they think they should get into. We're there to develop them into the kind of human beings that they want their children to be. We're here to educate what your child will be as a 40-year-old, right? We know college is going to be tough, but what will they be like when they're 40? That's going to happen in high school. So that's how we approach the process for selecting students is, okay, is this student ready for this kind of environment, learning environment?
You touched upon the character. I mean, if we can elaborate a little further, what type of character traits do you, as admission officers at boarding schools, would focus on when you make your selection?
Does the student have a sense of self-reliance? I would say, the ability to work with others, a sense of humor. Yeah, absolutely. A sense of humor. We're looking for someone with a sense of humor, someone who's fun to be with, who really engages in conversations. We're looking for someone who isn't afraid to try new things. I don't know what, and that to me is an important character trait. Self-responsibility. We're not going to follow them around the campus. We're not going to tell them when to get to their sports practice or orchestra, their art room. They have to do that themselves. We're not looking for students who have to be handheld all the time. So that's the self-reliance, the self-determination. In particular in boarding schools, this sense of self-reliance is really important. See, in a day school, and I'm picking a day school, I was in day schools for 25 years, but in a day school, a student can just go home, right? Go to the classes and just go home. They're not required to be many places, not required to be in sports or anything after school. They can just go home. But in a boarding school, no, day doesn't end at the end of the last class session. You got to move to your afternoon activity, right? Mm-hmm. Then you've got to finish activity and you've got to sit down at a dining hall together, and you can't sit by yourself. It's really, I've never seen that happen, by the way, but you don't sit by yourself. Then you got to go back to the dormitory and you have to study, and you have to have the self-determination to be able to study without someone looking over your shoulder. Then you have to know when it's time to go to bed. It's not time to play computer games or things like that. So you can just, that alone would tell you the kind of person that finds success in a boarding school. It's a hard life, by the way. It's a very big day. But boarding schools do a remarkable job of developing character.
Indeed, I mean, we can, if we imagine days like that stretching into, some 5 days a week, some boarding schools would do 5.5, 6 days a week, and we do it for 4 years. That's the type of, trajectory. It's not like this, but it's like going that way for the person, for the student.
Yeah, absolutely. It's remarkable from a faculty. I mean, I love boarding schools because you have to love teenagers to work in a boarding school, but to see them outside the classroom. I was a coach also. To see them I was track and field, to see them on the track, outside the classroom, interacting with other students. You don't win all the time in track. Most of the time you don't win. A lot of times you come in last. How do they respond to that? How do they integrate with each other as teammates? It's just wonderful to watch. To see them in the dining hall just doing what teenagers do, it is remarkable. And I have to tell you, when they graduate and they come down at Webb, they come down from graduation, walk down this long walkway between the faculty and parents. We're all crying because we love what we just saw. We're just so proud of them.
Many parents know that about me, but maybe not all the viewers out here. I'm a graduate and an alum at Webb. So, and that's my web tie. I always wear it in all public occasions, in celebration and in recognition of all the change that I've gained through my experience at Webb. So, yes, I'm a testimony.
And along those lines, when our alumni come back to the school, I've never had one ask me, where are they going to college? I've never had that question. They want to know, in our case, how's the chapel program? We have a museum on our schools. So how's the museum doing? Tell me more about how the students are doing in their activities. I mean, those are the questions we get. They ask us about, is the school still the place to develop people the way they develop me?
We often see students get admitted into, certain schools. But at the same time, during the application process, you don't apply to just one school. You apply to a spectrum of schools. While the student might be accepted by one or a few schools, they do not get offers, or they get denied or waitlisted, right, by a host of other quite similar schools. I mean, from your observations, so how do boarding schools assess the candidates differently. And we talk about mission appropriate, but obviously different schools have different missions, right? So how, from parents' point of view, then how can they assess, which schools or in which schools their child might have a higher chance, so to speak?
That's a part of it. It's a bit subjective. But here's the thing, to the last point of your question, is parents are often not researching the school to look for things that are important. They're researching the school to see, where will it get me? I would say when you go to those, have a general sense of the kind of school you're looking for, maybe region, single sex, co-ed, size, all those things, weather. But then when you start looking at those schools, have in your head what you think is important. If what you think is important is you go right to the page of where they go to college, that's not going to be the school. That's not the way to pick a school. So they're often looking for the wrong things. They should be looking for, how does this seem to fit my student? For example, my child loves music. What kind of music program do they have? My child loves sports and athletics. What kind of athletic program do they have? That's the way you start choosing the schools. And that gives you, frankly, a better chance of getting in, because at the end of the day, when we're looking at a student and a family, is this student really interested in my school? We understand you're going to have 3 or 4 choices. I just want to know that you have some interest in my school. We're not just a big list. But every school is different. I mean, you have different personalities around the table. So the objective is, okay, you have so many girls' beds, so many boys' beds. You got to fill those. So if you have too many girls, they're not really competing against the boys, because they're competing against how many beds you have. If we have 50 kids applying from Texas, we're not going to take every kid from Texas, because we want a well-rounded class. We want different experiences. So that plays in very much around the table. And so every school has a different sense of what that is or what their needs are. And there's no way we can really describe that from school to school to parents. Parents should be asking, what do you promise to do for my child? And a school better be ready to answer that question. We promise that your child will be engaged, will be taken care of, will be looked after, that will have people who will know her and him. We promise they'll be intellectually challenged in the classroom. We don't promise to get them into, you name a celebrity college. We'd never say that. But we promise that we're gonna help develop your child to the person they want to be. Schools should answer that question. Parents should ask the question, what do you promise? So I wish I could be more specific. And again, when I was traveling overseas, I'd always get the question, what does it take to get in? And we can't answer that question, except to say, be ready for an academic challenge, be the kind of person that can live in a boarding environment, willing to take intellectual and personal risks. Personal risks mean try something new, things like that. But after that, there's no formula there.
This is why applying to American boarding schools or even American colleges, by extension, but especially American boarding schools, I find is such an art that there's no formula. The assessment process is subjective, and it's deliberately subjective, and it's so fun.
And that's where parents understand that it is subjective, and that's a scary thing. It's going to apply to universities also. And there's this myth in America about university selection that it is about the SAT, that's the answer, but it isn't. If everybody has great test scores, that doesn't tell us anything, right? It just tells us they can do the work. So at the end of the day, we sit down and say, can this student do the work? Can this student survive in the academic program? And we have to have a deep understanding of what our program requires, which we do. Can this student survive? We don't say, is this the best math student applying to our school? We never do that. Is this the best science student applying to our school? We never do that. Never do that. We just say they're ready for the program.
Before we end this part 1, Leo, can you share with our viewers some of the common myths that is out there about how a candidacy is assessed, or how a candidate is being assessed?
The first one is test scores. The myth that the better the test score, the better chance I have of getting in. Yep, that's definitely. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a thing called TOEFL, a thing called the International English Language Exam. These are language proficiency. Those do matter. We have to be sure the student is ready to engage in some fairly rigorous academic programs in the language of English. So those are important. But when it comes to these standardized test scores, this over test preparation, that's all they do. I mean, I know my early years, we were admitting students that all they did, they would go to school, then they go home and go to test prep courses, because frankly, that's the nature of the way students get admitted in places like China and in Korea into their schools. It's all about the test. It's not about the test. So I don't care if Daniel has got a 2300 and Leo has a 2200, makes no difference to us at all. If it says Daniel's in the 99th percentile and Leo is in the 85th percentile, doesn't matter. He can do the work. What we're interested in is what kind of people these are. The number 2 myth is send us a resume showing you all how many things you've done. The more, the better. The more activities I have, the better chance I have. That's completely wrong. Matter of fact, that tells us you're not really focused. You're just trying to build a resume. You're trying to build a profile. And that doesn't interest us at all. There's a term in college admissions called the pointed student. That's different. The pointed student. I'm a viola player. I have taken this to another level. I'm not just going to the Royal Academy exams. I'm going in orchestra. I'm accomplished. I'm demonstrated competent. The pointed student is more interesting than the one that says all the activities that I've done over the years, and we always say is, well, how long did you spend this activity? Oh, I just did it last year. No. So that's probably number 2. Maybe one of the myths would be is I've looked at your rankings, which by the way, none of those are legitimate, but we can't convince parents of that. That, the myth is if I get into X school, this will guarantee me a chance to get into my celebrity college dream, Harvard, Yale, Stanford.
Yes.
That's not the case. We can't guarantee that at all. There's no way we can guarantee that. And I guarantee if you come to our school in 9th grade hoping to go to X college, I guarantee by senior year, your mind will have changed anyway. So that's a big myth that somehow we're here to get you in to schools. We don't do that. We develop you intellectually. We develop you in character. And then it's up to you to do what it takes to be ready for those kinds of programs. So those are the 3 biggest myths, but no question, the biggest myth of all is this test score thing. But that probably has changed now because so many schools are only test optional or no test at all. I know schools that won't even look at a test score. Since I retired, I've probably visited 100 boarding schools and asked these kinds of questions, and it's fascinating. But there's such a commonality in how we make decisions. The commonality depends on the student and a lot of factors and who we are as a school and how many applications we have and what kind of class we're trying to develop. We are trying to develop a class of diversity in every way you can think of. Geography, culture, socioeconomic, racial equity, diversity, any kind of diversity. Diversity is not just one thing. It's a lot of things. We're trying to look at that. Athletics, musicians, artists, and so every year is different how we build that class.
Why that intense focus on diversity? I see that especially so among American schools. So it feels like it's like an American thing, American phenomenon. I'm not saying the schools of the other countries or cultures, they do not value diversity. But it's especially with the American schools that I noticed this very intense focus on the virtue that comes from diversity. Can you explain a little bit about the logic behind, so to speak?
It changes your life. Day schools, fantastic. They're wonderful schools, but their population is about 30 minutes out, right? Maybe 45 minutes out, however far the buses go. That's fine. It could be, but it tends to be a homogenized audience. Whatever racial makeup or an economic makeup of that community is. It tends to be homogenized. When you come to a boarding school, you're now connecting. When I was at Webb, Russian students, but not from Russia, Moscow, Vladivostok, Ukraine, Kazakhstan. I mean, imagine being in a dormitory, having those kinds of conversations and experiences. It's extraordinary. It just opens your minds up. It reminds me, when I was getting out of high school, I went to a beautiful, wonderful public high school outside Philadelphia, but it was a fairly homogenized community. But I was blessed with the opportunity to ending up in Hawaii, of all places, which is the most diverse place in America. It changed my life. It changed my life. There was every culture you can think of there. Everybody respected each other, but all the cultures kind of cross-pollinated there, with the Hawaiian culture permeating everything. And it just changed your life. And it's hard to explain, but you can't replicate what a boarding school can do in terms of diversity in another kind of secondary education. And again, I'm not criticizing those are what they are. But boarding schools, it's remarkable. I was just talking to your producer, Sherry, and asking how many languages she speaks, which is only because I'm so impressed when people speak more than one language, because in America, we don't have a lot that speak more than one language. I was interviewing students. I interviewed students from China. She spoke 4 different languages. I mean, tell me that doesn't bring to your school remarkable diversity. It just was heartwarming. And by the way, a student from Alabama is completely different than a student coming from California. It's different experiences. People don't think of it that way. So we cherish that diversity because it opens your mind up to a broader world which surrounds us, and it shows how interconnected we are, and how our own personal experiences bring us together. It's just hard to explain how it is, but it's very important to us. Very important to us. And that is part of the selection process, is to try to make this school as diverse. Again, in a broad sense, what does diversity mean? That's how we look at these classes.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo, so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
For your sharing and insights.
Okay, bye now.
If you would like to learn more admission tips and tricks from Mr. Leo Marshall, please stay tuned to our part 2 of Admission Essentials series, where we'll be doing a deep dive into understanding how academics, standardized tests, and activities are assessed. And if you like what we have shared today, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Sesameed Education. Thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on our next episode of Admission Essentials.